What I really need at this point is to replace, I'm going to close off. I want to replace this particular thing, this entire section, with the repository pattern and the unit of work pattern. So I'm going to go ahead and add a new project of the class library type. The class library, going to go back, select class library. I can select .NET Standard, that is not a problem, but then let's not do that and stick to .NET Framework. I've had some surprises with that in the past. So Contoso University dot, I'm going to call it interfaces. Now what I really need here is repository, like so, and let's change this to interface. Alright, now as I said, that repository only has create, read and delete functionality, does not have update. I have gone ahead and created some code in the past, and this is what my repository class looks like. So let's copy this limited code and go back to our solution and paste it here. What we are going to do is, so T entity is something that we require. So T entity over here, and that fixes everything. Expression is part of system.linQ. Excuse me. All right, and with that we have at least 3 set of functions. One is for reading, two for or one for adding, and one for removing. 3 sections. The read functionality has 3 type of overload. One is get, one is get all, one is find. Find is that predicate expression that is going to fix the switch case statement inside the student controller. All right, if you guys remember that violation. But besides that, there is nothing fancy going on here. We have get function, we have add function, and we have remove function. And this is one place where I have specifically put a comment inside my application that no update. I can get rid of these 3 comments because they are conveying the idea anyway. But then there is a specific intention that I don't want an update function inside my repository. So I've mentioned that thing as a comment, and I'm going to leave that comment there. All right, so this is the repository interface. Now this repository is going to require a concrete implementation. And then that concrete implementation we are going to provide inside another project, and I'm going to call it probably the model. I have specifically done it inside. I would do it differently this time. Differently. I'm going to call it new project. I'm going to again select the .NET Framework class library. I'm going to call it Contoso University dot, I'm going to call it data access. That sounds like a logical name. I'm just going to call it repository, and I'm going to inherit, or I'm so sorry, you never inherit from interfaces. You only implement an interface. So I'm going to call it repository, and I'm going to call the entity over here. The generic type always has to be present on the left hand side. So with that, if I add reference to the interfaces, and if I hit control dot and implement, it is going to give an implementation of all of these functionality. Now just to save time, I am going to copy this thing as a part of implementation from this code as well. Now I know. All right, and this repository has a reference of the DB context. The question to you guys is, sometime back I said that DB context should not be present inside repository, and here I have added it. I'm trying to recollect why I did that. I cannot think of a reason, but probably because
you were talking about the open close principle. You wanted
yes,
to basically take it to a higher level, right? Be able to replace
right,
the
right.
database.
Right, I think I know why I have put it there. Notice that at any point I'm not going to call the dot save changes function. All right, now it is clear to me. what is bothering me right now is why I'm seeing this red squiggly. Must be a reference type of parameter t entity. So t entity is already present over here. Let me just go ahead and copy this entire class. Let's not copy, come back. That's going to ruin the namespaces one more time. So everything inside the namespace, copy, and I'm going to replace everything inside the namespace. Alright, probably there was some typo. Oh, alright, so I did not mention that t entity should be a class. I was missing this line and that's why I was giving an error. Alright, one thing that I want to mention at this point is that if you go to the definition of DB context, and this is a very crucial step for anybody who is serious about refactoring, alright, you have to read the documentation. Not reading documentation is going to land you in situations that you will not be able to come out from. Alright, so let's read this comment out loud. A DB context instance represents a combination of unit of work and repository patterns, such that it can be used to query from a database, group together changes that will set something to return back. The keyword here is the repository pattern and the unit of work. Alright, so DB context of entity framework is already creating those two things for us. Alright, the only problem is that it is not applicable at a bigger context. We want to apply it to a very limited context. The way DB context does that is the in-memory collection is maintained inside a variable called DB set. So anytime you want to extract something out of the DB context, you will have to use the set class, and then set of say t entity, and t entity is a student or probably a course. So anytime you want to extract out data from a database or from a DB context, you are going to put a wrapper around this DB context, and you're going to use the collection that DB context is already maintaining. Does that make sense? Did I help you guys, or did I confuse you guys?
Can you please repeat that?
All right. So I hope you guys remember that the repository is an in-memory collection. But then what is the source of that collection? How do you create that? For creating this collection, we are again going to rely on the entity framework itself. All right. That data for us is coming from this class. All right. When we want to extract the data, we'll require a collection, but then this class cannot generate that collection. All we are doing is we are relying on the DB context object for accessing that collection. DB context already has that collection inside it in the form of this repository pattern. All right. The DB context is that in-memory collection. Does that make sense?
Right. One question over here is like,
Sure, sir.
if we have that DB context, so aren't we tying it more to entity framework over here?
We are.
So why I'm asking is like, let's say during the decision, if we have like another persistence layer, maybe MongoDB, how we can actually do that?
Exactly. And that's where I got confused. So my previous project was correct. I should have not called it data access. I should have called it data access dot probably say entity framework dot SQL. All right. This is a better representation of that particular name. All right. So repository, this specific implementation is for entity framework and SQL Server. If you want another implementation, which is more specific to MongoDB, I don't know if there's a framework for MongoDB, but I'm going to call that project something like this: data access dot mongo dot say MongoDB, right? And then inside this one, my class here is going to become say MongoRepo, and then again I'm going to inherit from a repository of tentity, right? So it is going to be the exact same class that we are writing for the SQL Server, but it is only going to probably, instead of DB context, it is going to be more specific to MongoDB, right? And then instead of creating DB context object, I'm going to create MongoDB context. All right, and I'll be doing all the Mongo specific activity inside this particular thing. The one thing that repository should not do, or probably two things that repository should not do, is not update the collection, do not provide update functionality, and two, do not provide any persistence related functionality. All right, and we are not doing that. All we are doing is that we are using the collection object that is already present inside the context. And this is where open for modification, open for extension, close for modification is also going to play out. All right, the reason we created a separate project for interface is because we want to dictate the rules of that game, that we have a
Also-
get and add and remove functionality. Yes, sir, go ahead.
Also dependency injection, right?
Exactly.
Because you're injecting different databases
Exactly.
based on
Exactly. So all of a sudden, the database has been picked out from the website project and it is stuck inside this particular thing, right? Now, database is only, SQL Server at least, is only concern of this particular project.
Are we saying that this DB context will not support MongoDB?
I think so, yeah. I know that Entity Framework Core has support for NoSQL databases. I have not tried that, but I think by putting through the right dependencies and stuff like that, you will be able to support MongoDB, but you should
But
implement.
in an ideal scenario, it should support, right? But yeah, in the worst case scenario, I think what you did makes sense. But I think in ideal scenario, when we say repository pattern, the framework which we are choosing, right?
Right.
The DB context from Entity Framework, that should help us connecting to all the different database, what we have,
It
whether
would.
it's a SQL or a NoSQL.
It would, but then if you go back to our discussion some time back, I would again look at the common noun and proper noun. Database to me is a proper noun. A common noun to me is persistent storage. All right, and that persistent storage can be made available to me through web services. Right? Right? How do you create a repository that is sitting on the other side of a web API? So all you have to do is you have to add another class library project and probably call it web API persistence, something like this, right?
Yeah.
And then this persistence again is going to be implementing the I repository of T
Repository.
entity, right? And then over here you declare HTTP clients, right? And
I
then
see.
you have a persistence of the repository through web APIs, right? And our home controller will have absolutely no clue if the data is coming from SQL or Mongo or some web API somewhere, correct? Because the concern
Understood.
has been taken away.
Oh,
All right. So the idea is that you separate interfaces and you separate implementation.